This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
What's going on, y'all? It's your host, Will, coming back for another episode of the HuntStand podcast. On today's episode, bringing on a good friend and bona fide high country velvet muley public land DIY do-it-all over-the-counter man himself, Mr. Joe Kavanaugh. Now, Joe's a really good friend of mine. We've known each other for a few years now. We've worked in the industry together in other places. And so just getting Joe on here to pick his brain on how he does this every time he draws a tag. Now, recently, he's drawn a coveted tag to chase after bighorn sheep up in the mountains of Colorado with his bow. So that's going to be a really cool hunt to see. I can't wait to follow up and see how he does on that hunt this fall. But we get Joe on here so I can pick his brain and find out how he is successful every time he gets one of these muley tags. I mean, y'all, he is putting down some studs, some awesome muleys every time he gets his tag. He does it. I know there's lots of trials and tribulations behind it. And so I want to get Joe on here so y'all can learn from him and how he approaches going after these high country muleys. You know what? If you're like me, when I go to Colorado, I'm primarily going after elk. And I may or may not have a mule deer tag in my pocket. So that way, if I'm out in the elk woods and I just happen to see a really, really good mule deer buck that I want to shoot, I've got that opportunity. But Joe specifically just puts that mule deer tag in his pocket. And so I'm talking to all you guys and gals out there that are just like that. Or you might even be chasing after elk and you want to know, hey, there's just no elk here. I'm going to switch it up and we're going after some muleys. I've been seeing some mule deer. And so we're going to get Joe on here to talk about that, how he attacks these areas, what he does from e-scouting to being out in the woods and then glassing and just everything in between. And so I want to get Joe on here to talk about that. And again, y'all, we just want to thank all of y'all for your support of the HuntStand podcast. We greatly appreciate it. If you haven't yet, make sure you're either following and subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you rate, review, really helps us out. And if you got anything you want us to talk about, if there's a topic out there that you think we should be covering, or you got questions for us, hit me up, send me an email to podcast@huntstand.com. That way I know your voice is heard. So I'm going to quit rambling. I'm going to get into it with Joe, pick his brain. We appreciate y'all for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy. All right, everybody, we're back to another HuntStand podcast, and today we got Mr. Joe Kavanaugh. Joe, I really appreciate you hopping on the podcast with us today to talk about some high country mule deer.
I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, brother. I know we've got a little bit of a past together, and gotten to shoot some bows together and do some cool stuff together. And so, man, one of the things I like to do, because the audience doesn't know you like I do. I mean, I know all your little secrets. So I want you to give everybody kind of the 30-foot tree stand view of who Joe is, where you're from, what you're doing, and let's, talk about your passion for hunting.
All right, cool. Yeah, I was born and raised in central Minnesota, and that's where I really kicked off the passion for archery hunting. You're 12 years old is when the legal age, right? Or when I was 12, that was the legal age to hunt archery. So, just hunting with my dad from a tree stand, whitetails. I mean, that's basically all we hunted in Minnesota, or all we had the opportunity to hunt. So really kind of, put the foundation for my passion of archery hunting. And that took me all the way up into, through college. And then, the real world came knocking, I guess, and had to take a real world job. And that actually brought me to Florida. And I lived in Florida until I was 29 or 30 years old, and worked for the same company, and then ultimately had the opportunity to move out to Colorado. And, even when I was growing up, I was watching the Outdoor Channel and everything, and I would see, not very many shows had high country mule deer, but some did. And I always was intrigued by that. So when I moved out here, that was, really my main focus when I was going to come out here. And so, now I live in Denver, been out here 5 or going on 6 years, going on 7. So, and since day one, I've really immersed myself into, what I like to call this, backcountry, high country hunting community. And Will, that's kind of how I met you is through this. And, through some other companies that we knew of. And so, yeah, now it's really kind of, my number one passion, at least for September, is high country mule deer. And I get made fun of quite a bit being out here in Colorado, as I would put this above elk hunting. And a lot of my buddies, yeah, exactly. A lot of my buddies go, "What are you talking about?" And honestly, I drew my mule deer tag or a mule deer tag this year. I don't know if I'll buy an elk tag for archery, so we'll see. I mean, I like to kind of go all in on trying to find the biggest buck in the unit and trying to put a game plan together to kill that buck. Obviously it's easy to put things on paper and make a plan, and then once the season rolls around, things change. But I would rather have more preparation done early than not. So yeah, that's a high 10,000 foot view or tree stand view of my career and where I am now. And but yeah,
I like it, brother. I like it. So I know you and I have talked behind the scenes on this, but why don't you tell everybody kind of that coveted tag that you have drawn this year?
Yeah, so this year is going to be a little bit different because I did draw a bighorn Rocky Mountain sheep tag in Colorado. And so normally, Will and I were talking about this podcast. I go into how many weekends I'll be scouting and this and that. Well, when you draw a tag like this, which is, basically a once in a lifetime tag. I mean, I'm fairly young, but there could be an outside chance that I draw it again, years and years down the road. But at that point where I drew this tag, I don't know if I'll physically able to do it. But yeah, I found out about that about a month ago. And so fortunately, it's an area where I had one of my good buddies draw it 2 years ago, Fred Bohm, which
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a ton of time with him 2 years ago, and unfortunately he didn't kill anything, but I learned that unit probably better than most people. I think I was up there like 32 or 33 days between scouting and hunting. And then just crazy enough, last year, our buddy who Braden Forsyth, he killed a giant in there, or a giant to me, with his bow, and I was with him on that hunt. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, but yeah. So over the last 2 years, I've spent quite a few nights and scouting trips, hunting trips with guys up in this unit. So I don't want to be overconfident. Obviously, this area can humble you really quick just because of how extreme and how hard the hunting is. But yeah, that is going to be all of August. It starts August 1. And I've already made arrangements that I'm probably not going to be coming down off the mountain anytime, maybe just to refuel up and, get a shower in me. But yeah, I'm going to be all in on that tag. And then obviously scouting, that's going to take up all of July, I'll go on 3-day weekends and stuff. So, but yeah, that's going to cut into my scouting for mule deer. I'll tell you that. But I wouldn't have it any other way, honestly.
Man, I'm jealous. That's a heck of a tag to draw. So, but okay,
yeah,
let's get on the mule deer, man. I really want to pick your brain because you've killed some bruisers over the past few years. You've been with people who've killed some bruisers, and I think there's a lot of people that we were just talking before the podcast, right? That the majority of the people that go out west, I mean, a lot of people are non-resident, and so it's really hard to get boots on the ground scouting like you do. And so, of course, I want to talk how to scout like that. I want to talk e-scouting and just kind of dive into that high country mule deer, man. And so I guess the first place to start that I'd like to ask you is, how difficult is it to get, specifically to Colorado, how difficult is it to get one of those archery mule deer tags?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying, I'm probably your average Joe type hunter. I don't have years and years of experience like a Brian Barney or some of those guys that are just absolute killers and really, are the peak of mule deer hunting. But, for me, it was something where, I started to look at different areas that looked good or where I was seeing, mule deer. And I really focus in on the high country. There's a few different areas that you can hunt mule deer in Colorado. And a lot of people see the hunting shows out in eastern Colorado in the plains and like the flatlands out there. And unfortunately, those are, I would say, the majority of the big deer that are killed there on private land. I would say the vast majority. And so, you would have to use an outfitter or know people that have land. And so, once you get up into the mountains, that's where a lot of the BLM land, the national forest, the wilderness areas are all available to the public. So, it's really the choice on what you want to do, but how hard these tags are going to be, it really depends on each unit. And we were talking before the podcast how some of the units that I hunt have the same draw stats as a resident versus non-resident, which is very unusual if you're thinking in the sense of like elk hunting, where a resident probably has, it might only take 5 points to draw a good unit, but it might take a non-resident 10 points. So, I would say narrowing down where you want to hunt, what you want to hunt, like the terrain you want to hunt in, is going to be number one. And then looking at those units that have that. And I've always focused in on, these high country above tree line units. And, and that's really where I've started. And that's where I've really, I guess, cut my teeth. And once you get into it, you're going to start kind of connecting the dots for where deer like to hang out, where they like to feed, where they like to bed. And then from there, it's kind of moving into the online e-scouting, if you will, and finding those basins or ridge lines or mountaintops that look like where you've seen deer. And I would say the majority of the time, if you've seen deer in one area and it looks good, there's a solid chance that there's going to be deer in the other area.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of where I start. But from a non-resident versus resident standpoint, it's really, there isn't too many units out here in Colorado that are, more than a few points, at least in the high country. I mean, if you have, 2 or 3 years of points, you're probably going to have a fairly good chance of drawing most of the units. There's obviously some outliers with that are just higher density deer or maybe just less tags.
Okay. So I want to go and step into e-scouting. Let's talk to that guy that, let's say he drew his first mule deer tag. He's gone to Colorado and he's elk hunted once or twice, right? And he's been in a unit where he's actually run across some mule deer and he pulls a tag there. So he pulls that tag and now it's e-scouting season. So what are the major key points or key features you're looking at when you're starting to e-scout for that unit?
Yep. So, the fortunate thing about Colorado is we'll kind of back up. A lot of people talk about, they need to have water, they need to have food, they need to have, places to bed. Colorado, for the most part, the high country, those basins are going to have water. And a lot of times, there's a lot of water. Like it's almost like a slough, like swamp area. So water, at least the areas that I've hunted, aren't that. It's not like you got to find water holes or anything like that. But for the people that have been up there and looked into areas and like, hey, I've elk hunted, I've seen some good deer. It's kind of just looking at where you saw them and what type of terrain it was, and was it up in the rocks? Because I doubt they live but were they pushed up there because you were hunting elk? Was it high country basins? Was it, high country, kind of grassy flatland, flats up there that they were feeding on? And once you identify that, if you've seen deer in those areas, what I like to do is just kind of look in the unit that you can hunt and find those areas that look similar. And for me, I have the luxury of, it's only a, 2 to 4 hour drive or more, depending on where I'm hunting.
Yeah.
So I can get these, weekend scouting trips and kind of check off some of these areas. And what I'm doing is just trying to draw comparisons between areas that I know have produced or have seen deer in, and what are these other areas that look similar. And then I go in and check those areas out. And I would say the people that are wanting to scout for mule deer, I would say that would be my number one thing, is what I'm looking at. Like when I'm sitting watching TV, I'm pulling up the maps and just kind of scanning through, whatever app you're using, or Google Earth, or whatever else, is trying to find those areas that look good, putting a pin from that point. And then once you're there, if you can't do any scouting, you almost need to look at, like, if the average hunter is taking a 10-day trip or a 7-day trip, and maybe you've only been in the unit once, and that, okay, I've seen deer here, but I want to check out all of these. Is it actually doable for you to check out those areas? Because logistically, you might not be able to get into a basin. It might take you a day or two. Well, that's all good if there's deer in there. But if you've never been in there and there's not deer there, maybe there's other areas you can check out that aren't going to burn up a full day. And so that's kind of where the next layer of scouting is, looking on these maps of, hey, do you have to hike in? Well, think about, everybody looks and you can draw the line of how far it is. And you're like, wow, that's 4 miles back in. Well, if you're 4 miles back in with camp, food, how quick can you actually get back there and actually scout? And, obviously the best times to scout are going to be at first light and at last light. The hour after first light and the, half an hour before, sundown. And so, I like to give a basin or an area that I'm scouting a minimum of an evening and a morning, before I say, this is a spot where I'm going to hunt, or this isn't a spot where deer are. So, that's a lot of time invested, especially if you can't scout. But, that's how you learn these different areas, is you got to be able to put the time in.
Well, when you're e-scouting, let's take a step back for a second. Like when you're e-scouting, what altitude are you looking for? Like, are you trying to find water? Are you looking for like those micro meadows per se? Like what are those exact detailed things you're looking for when e-scouting?
Yeah, well, and the majority of the stuff that I'm looking at is right at about tree line. I've hunted a few different units, and each unit is actually different on how I've scouted or hunted it.
Okay.
One unit was, all I looked at was high country basins, probably up at 11,000 feet up to, 12,500 feet. And the majority of the deer were in these basins, and they were filled with willows. And these willows were anywhere from knee high to like 9 or 10 feet high. And literally there was like tunnels where the deer would cross from, willow patch to willow patch. And that was an extremely hard way to hunt, because a lot of these, high country mule deer shows that you've seen or heard about is stalking in and shooting them from the bed. Well, that wasn't it. And it took me a year or two to figure that out. And then I started to figure out, okay, these are the type of high country basins these deer live in. And then the other units I've looked at have been the deer simply bed up in the rock cliffs. I mean, very similar to like sheep, just not so high. And then they feed down into those little meadows that everyone's seen, on the peaks where it's rock slide. And then all of a sudden you'll see this, bright green face that might be, the reason it's so green is there's still like a snow cornice up top, and it's, melting down, and it's just lush green grass. Well, that's a little bit different, and you got to be able to find those. And what's the crazy thing about e-scouting is you got to look at when those pictures were taken from satellite, because if they were taken in November, there might be snow on the ground, or maybe everything's dead. So you seeing it, you don't even know if it's just dirt or if it's grass, or so all that stuff kind of goes into play. And actually, I don't know what I think Google, or you can look at where the timestamp of that picture was taken. And you can go on different apps, and some have different pictures and everything and different overlays. But, it's just kind of figuring out what is in that unit that you're hunting, and where do the deer live. And that's where it's, like I was saying, they could live in the rocks and up in these cliff bands where they're really tucked in. And those are going to give you opportunity to stalk in and shoot them when they're in their bed. And then these other willow basins, I mean, the moment they're not on their feet, they disappear. And I mean, they disappear quick, because these beds that they're in are truly they're beds that they've bedded in all summer, probably once they got up there, in late spring, and that now they're staying there until, I mean, some might stay in there until mid-September. So, and that's also like one of the things that you hear a lot of people say is, I want to be such a good hunter and be able to hunt all these different areas and be successful. That's awesome. I would rather, myself personally, would like to get to know a few different units and know them enough to be like, if I drew a tag in there and I don't have the time to scout, I'm still going to be able to be successful, or at least know where to start. And that's where I would say these people that maybe they can come every other year, I would say pick a unit, and if you see deer and have a fun hunt, stay in that unit and just try to learn it a little bit better. And that just goes right back into whitetail hunting. You hunt a piece of property or a piece of ground, you're going to start to see how deer movement is, and you're going to pick up on that. But if you've only hunted it a week, a year, you're not going to learn that, and that's, whitetail 101.
Going back to the monthly imagery that you're talking about, HuntStand, we actually have that option where you can go back and look kind of month to month.
Oh, that's awesome. Perfect.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge help, at least for my e-scouting. So
yeah, it's pretty big. We use it a lot. So
yeah.
Okay, so what's the elevation range? I know like each unit is different, but kind of give us that elevation range that you're looking in for a lot of these deer.
So for me, like I said, I'm in the high country. That's what I really focus in on. And I would say, the deer are anywhere from, and I actually have my maps pulled up now, and I'm looking, and I'm seeing these basins that I'm hunting in are anywhere from 11,400 all the way up. I got pins of where deer have bedded all the way up to about 12.5, 12.6.
Okay.
And it's everywhere in between now. But I'll tell you, a few years back, I also hunted a unit that they were down in the sage flats, and
really?
I mean, it was hotter than crap. I mean, it was like 100 degrees, or it felt like 100 degrees. And they were just bedding in these little aspen groves. I mean, so similar to like how elk would be, And so it's just going to depend on what type of hunt you want.
Yeah.
For me, I want to be above tree line. I want to not only battle the physical part of hiking up and down, 1,000, 1,300, 1,400 vertical feet a day, if not more. You might do that twice a day. But then also the elements of, everybody that's hunted Colorado knows these storms are wicked. I want to deal with that. I want to use that, as sometimes to my advantage, and sometimes it kicks my ass and I got to get off the mountain. But to me, that's what brings the excitement and the joy of not only having to, battle the deer that is obviously a much better a much better animal to be able to survive. But then also you got to deal with all these elements. And I just think that's like the total package for me of what I like to do.
I like that.
But
You like to brave the storm.
Well, hey, and you know as well as I do, some of those storms can be absolutely wicked and I mean, legitimately blow you off the mountain.
All right, y'all, we're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. The HuntStand podcast is brought to you by Yamaha and its full line of class-defining, adventure-seeking motorcycles, ATVs, and side-by-side vehicles. Up next, Federal Premium. Go beyond what you ever thought possible with Federal Premium Terminal Ascent. Bonded construction penetrates deep on close targets, while the patented slipstream polymer tip initiates expansion at velocities 200 feet per second lower than comparable designs. The bullet's long, sleek profile offers an extremely high ballistic coefficient, and its AccuChannel groove technology improves accuracy and minimizes drag. And finally, we've got Work Sharp Tools, the knife sharpening company. We just wanted to thank all of our partners of the HuntStand podcast, and we're going to get right back to this episode of the HuntStand podcast. Yes, they can. They can definitely kick you where it hurts. So, okay, you've done your e-scouting, all right? You've got your tag in hand. You've done your e-scouting, and I know we've kind of talked about, once you finally get those boots on the ground, kind of exploring basins and trying not to waste too many days, but kind of tell us, like, what's your next step in the Joe Kavanaugh process of killing giant muleys up in the high country? You've done those things. What's next on Joe's book?
Yeah, well, so I guess it's twofold. So I'll kind of talk about the scouting process, but then let's say maybe we don't have that, and I'll kind of go into what I would do like this year where I might not have the ability to scout. Mm-hmm. So for me, I don't really, especially in Colorado this year, there's a lot of snow. And I think you're, seeing a lot of that in Montana and everything with the runoffs and all these rivers and everything. There's just a lot of snow in some areas.
It's insane.
Yeah. So for me, I like to get all my preparation done in June and then have a good 4th of July, enjoy yourself. And then I am really every weekend in July, I'm scouting. And so for me, what that means is, if it was a normal year and I didn't have a sheep tag, antelope season starts the 15th. So however that works out, is it 4 weekends of scouting or is it 5? Or, some people like the TAC events, they got to throw that in there. So I look at it, how many weekends do I have? And if I have 4 weekends to scout, I am choosing 4 different areas to scout. And I am going in, and that could mean that I spend one evening and a morning in another basin, and that could be Friday night, Saturday morning, and then I leave and hike into another basin, and I spend Saturday night, Sunday morning, and then I'm hiking out. I'm a weekend warrior type scouting. And I think unless you're after a big deer, I would rather go in and find multiple shooters in that unit, because just like we talked about, it's so populated. There is so many people, it doesn't matter about the tags. The last 2-3 years, I have never ran into more people in the high country than I have. So you got to have those backup plans. And so each unit, I'm just taking inventory of what I see. Now, I'll give you an example of last year. I scouted this basin. It was the first basin because I knew it very well. And there was 4 or 5 good bucks, and they could have they did turn into shooters. And what I say a shooter for me is, any 175, 180 plus, like that's what the caliber of deer. Obviously judging deer can be difficult, but in my mind, that's what I'm trying to find.
Yeah. And
there was one deer in there that literally I was like, wow, if this guy blows up, he's going to be huge. And he did. But I also, this wasn't because I scouted it early. I never saw his progression from the first week of July all the way up to September 2nd. And he had grown a ton. But I looked at 3 or 4 different areas, and, through social media, and I had another buddy that I was hunting with. It was like every basin I wanted to go into, I knew someone else was going to go into there. So this was actually like my 3rd or 4th basin, but it had a ton of bucks in it. And these bucks I was on a stalk almost every day. And I actually had another group of guys who turned out to be just really cool dudes. It was like, the first time hunting, or they had been up there a few times, but we worked together, and, it worked out well. But for me, the scouting part of it is about narrowing down where are you going to put your chips during hunting. And to me, it's having that plan A, plan B, plan C. So I understand that people that don't have the amount of time to scout like I do can't do that. But what I would say is if you didn't have any scouting, I would just try to be compiling as much information from people that you hunted that unit or that gave you information, but still put together, this is my A basin. Well, let's say you get to that trailhead and there is 3 pickup trucks and they're all archery hunters, and they're all going in there.
Which is very likely to happen.
Very likely. So then you could go to B, and then let's say the same thing happens. Then you can go to C. But if you already have that planned out in your mind, if you don't and one fails, you're going to kind of be like, oh shoot, what do I do now? But if you're like, nope, no big deal, I'm going to B. Oh, no big deal, that one's packed, I'm going to C. It doesn't stress you out. And I don't think you get the anxiety of like, oh, I just spent all this money, wasted all this time, all this vacation time, or whatever you're doing. I just think having that plan ahead of time is going to, I guess, relieve the stress, and where you can focus that energy on other things rather than, having a plan, or shoot, like even downloading the right maps. Like, some of these units are giant. You can't download all the maps to your phone, or you bog it down, or having that all downloaded beforehand so you don't have to get out to service again, because that's a big issue. Once you get into these backcountries, service isn't, it's not great, unless you get way up high. So just having those plans in place so you're not sitting there, twiddling your thumbs at the trailhead wondering what to do. You can actually make a decision and go, okay, I'm pulling out and I'm going to plan B.
I like it. Yeah, that's happened to me before with elk hunting. I've had the greatest plan in the world set up, and I show up at the trailhead and it's like, crap. Because more than likely, like, just like you said, I mean, more than likely there's, if you've got a good plan, somebody else has the same exact good plan, if not a few more people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that happened to me last year. So I actually had an issue with my side-by-side. So I drove my truck to the trailhead, and there was these guys, and it wasn't an easy drive, and they were actually on 4-wheelers. And they're like, how the hell did you get your truck up here? And I told them, I go, hey, it wasn't easy. And I go, I'm not leaving for at least 6 days. I go, I got 6 days worth of food. I'm going to be in. And they were cool about it. And I said, let's work together, and so don't always get discouraged with people there. But, ultimately, regardless of how nice people are, I would say the majority, they want to fill a tag.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand that as well, is that everybody has their own motivation, spent their own time, money. Yes, it's all nice to say on Instagram of, I didn't kill anything, but I had a good time and this and that. Well, that might be some people. That isn't me. I mean, I am a very one or the other, and I either, my success is viewed on, did I take an animal or not, and I know that's a little narrow-minded, but that's for me is where I am. And I guess I'll caveat that with saying, if there just isn't a caliber of buck in the unit that I've found and I put in the time, I guess I wouldn't say that's a failure. I would just say that's a bad year and not a lot of good deer. And I probably wouldn't look in that unit again.
Yeah.
But, that does happen. So.
Okay. Well, the next thing I kind of want to dive into, unless you've got some other little nuggets to give us from that perspective, is I want to dive into glassing, because, and the reason I bring this up is I do feel like this is an underestimated, overlooked component when it comes to mule deer hunting. I think there's a lot of people that may not necessarily know how to do it well and effectively, that they might just be glassing right over a 160, 70, 180 class buck. So kind of give us, Are you using some 15 binos? You got scopes? Like, what's Joe doing, and what kind of tips can you give the listeners to glass up a big buck?
Yeah. Well, I would say the first tip is, and I'm going to take this from Brian Barney, is finding that master vantage point. He loves the term master vantage point. I think I love using it, and I laugh every time I say it, but it's like finding that master vantage point to be able to, the basin that you're in, so you can see as much of that basin as possible, or the area that you're wanting to hunt. I can't stress that enough of, even moving 100 yards or up or down, it just changes angles, and it's going to depend on, are you trying to pick up these deer when they're feeding, or are you going to try to pick them up when they're in their beds? And that's going to depend on the terrain that you're in. And if they are bedded up in the rocks, it's going to be like trying to, you are just focusing in and looking for that antler turn or the ear twitch, or are they feeding and you're just scanning and trying to find when they pop out through the willows, or maybe the sparse trees, the pines that are, there's just a few pines around. But for me, number one is finding those master vantage points so you can see as much of that basin as possible.
Yeah.
And, once you find that, I have 12 by 42s that I use that are just on my chest rig, my chest harness. And I would say until I spot deer, that's where I am just on those. And I will use those on a tripod, but then I'll also freehand them, which, I've got my elbows on my knees and I'm in a, little crouch position. So it's not like I'm freehanding them per se, but, and I am just scanning, and everybody does different. Some people do the grid search of, they're kind of around. I kind of do a combination of that. I know where the deer should be, and so I'm focusing in on those areas first. Now, I can't stress this enough. You got to be there. Like, if you're at your master vantage point and you can already see the deer, you're there too late. You got to be there. It's almost like whitetail hunting. Like, I argue with my dad so much. He wants to get into the stand and sit there for 5 minutes and then be able to shoot. I want to get there like 30 minutes or 45 minutes before, get all my stuff and gear checked out. And I'm sitting there just silent until you can shoot.
Yeah.
And so I like to get there a little bit early if possible, and then get everything set up. And now you're scanning even before you probably could shoot, but your bino should like get in enough light. So I like to do kind of those blanket scans. And then I don't pull out the spotter really until I see a deer, because even with 12s, I'm not looking, there might be some areas where I'm at a mile, but you should be able to pick out if that's a big deer, even with 12s. At least I can.
For sure.
But then once if they're a ways away, you pop up the spotter. And then that's when you're starting to look at what type of deer that is. And mule deer in the early season, they're bunched up. They're going to be in a herd. And so if you see one, there's more likely going to be a few around. They might be spread out, but it's very seldom ever see just one deer all by itself all the time. I just haven't seen many of that in Colorado. But, for me, and then, I got a 30 by 70, 95 mil spotter. So, I can really zoom in and, pick out the bucks that are good. Do they have little kickers? How deep are their forks? What's the way? And you really can start, doing the math on what that deer is going to score. Especially once you've seen pictures or seen other deer that you've killed where you're like, well, mine was 180. This one's way bigger. This guy's got to be pushing, 195 to 200. Well, okay, that's a shooter. That's something that I'm going to put my, all my eggs in one basket and try to kill, so, that's where I do it. But I mean, you'd be surprised that, I don't know if it's moon phase or weather, these deer will move late into the day, and sometimes midday, but I would say you got to be on those master vantage points at the first light and last light. And I just saw something. It's like, or I read an article, I can't remember where I saw it, but like not worrying about hiking in the dark. Like I have so many of my friends that are like, well, nothing's here, sun's going down. It's like, guys, that deer could be bedded and he could just come out with like 10 minutes left. And that could be you staying in that basin to kill that deer or moving on to somewhere where you don't know, if there's deer around. And that's something where I would, it's saying, hey, put in the extra 30 minutes there. It's like, who cares if you get back late? You're up there to do something, and it's to put a deer on the ground, or at least to find what caliber of deer. The only time you're going to regret that is when you're driving back home in the truck going, man, I probably should have stayed that extra 30 minutes till dark to see if anything popped out.
That's the golden hour, man. That's the magic time. That's when all the magic happens. You don't want to miss that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we did that. We did the same thing when I was mule deer hunting in Arizona in January. Yeah, sure, we're not up, at 11, 12,000 feet, but we were putting in 2 miles before the sun came up, getting to a good glassing knob that we found through e-scouting and getting set up on that so that as soon as it started getting to that gray light and starting to get light, then all of a sudden there's deer all around us. So yeah. Can't miss that magical hour. So we've kind of covered scouting. We've covered glassing. Now I want to talk about the stock. That I feel like this is, from my perspective, I feel like this is probably the toughest part about it all, because sometimes you can just get dumb lucky and you can find every deer and you didn't put any scouting in, but then comes the stock, man. So kind of talk us through, how you like to approach that scenario, that after you find that buck in the glass, it's a buck that you want to go after. Talk us through your process.
Yeah. Well, number one, obviously the wind, right? That is the most important, and then I would say noise, number two.
Yeah.
Where elk hunting, you can get away with noise. You can't, no hunting, you're going to get away with smell. But for me, it goes back to scouting again and understanding the thermals. And you got to understand when those thermals will switch in the day, because every basin is facing a different direction, meaning one side might be getting this early sun, the sun rising, other side, when the sun is setting, and really understanding that. So when you're in those basins, scouting, it's not just willy-nilly just sitting your ass on the thing looking through glass. Like I am constantly like, oh, when a storm's coming in, what happens? Does the wind shift? Where do the storms come from? Do they all of a sudden switch the thermals or the directional wind? And in Colorado, and I think this is probably everywhere, the directional wind is very difficult to predict.
Yes.
It's really, and that from elk hunting, and so does everybody else. But, understanding the thermals is so key in when those switch in the day. And, in the mornings, they're sucking down the hill. Well, when does that change? I've been in basins where the thermals didn't change until like 11 o'clock. And it was like within the 5-10 minutes every morning of the same time. I've also been in basins where those thermals change at like 8. And you better get your ass down there before they change and try to get up under that deer. Otherwise, you're going to blow them out. So mine is always, and what I also am doing, even on the stock, I am constantly checking the wind, looking at where the sun is, looking at what the clouds are doing. Is a storm rolling in? What happens? So when like, even if you don't go in to like on a stock to kill, like you just maybe want to cut the distance and maybe just get lucky that he walks into you, but always learning what those wind patterns are going to do, because they're called a pattern for a reason. That, given a storm or something different in the weather, the wind is probably going to be fairly consistent, at least in the early season, when it's, blue skies and sunny and a consistent wind, those are going to be the same. So, and then once you get that down and you know that you can get in, I have two thought processes on stalking mule deer. And this is just my opinion. And it depends on where I am. If it's in the cliffs, which I've done a lot of hunting in, where, the willows, maybe they're only a knee high, and you could see the deer, you can get above them and get an arrow into the deer when it's bedded, or if they just need to get up and you can get in close, and even then, I still don't like to get within, anything closer than like 40 or 50 yards, depending on the terrain. Mm-hmm. I'd rather hang back because I feel that if you're too close, those mule deer don't get up and look at you like, what are you? If they see you, they just bolt. If you're at that 50, 60, 70 yard mark, they kind of look and go, what are you? And might give you that extra bit of time, to get a shot off. But that's in the cliffs, where you're actually going in and you're taking your boots off. It's a boots off situation, and you're putting on the extra layer of socks or your spotting shoes or stalking shoes, I guess, and going in to try to kill that deer either in its bed or when they get up to shift, right? And I've done a lot of those stalks and failed a lot of those stalks. But the other part is where if they're in the willows, it's very hard to get in tight to them because the willows are so tall. It doesn't matter if they stand up, their vitals are still going to be covered. And even if you're at a distance, your arrow angle isn't going to be able to arc over those willows unless they're like in a little bit of a meadow area. So on those, like I've recently done where I kind of hang out and I know where they are. And if the wind is good, like the big buck that I killed 2 years ago, 2 years ago, I sat on him for like 8 hours and I got to a spot. I was about 300 yards away and I knew the wind was bulletproof. It was perfect. It was a directional wind. And I knew even when the sun was going to go down, it was going to run down the mountain, and he was basically parallel. And he actually walked into the wind up the mountain. And I basically had a lane that I could basically parallel him and angling closer. And I basically cut him off. But I don't think I would have been able to get down there if I was at my vantage point, which would have been like a half mile away. He would have been too far up the basin by the time I got there. And so I think sitting on them where you're not going to get winded is going to be key. And then have a approach where you're going to be concealed to cut him off as they're feeding. And that's also going to depend on how many other bucks he's with and how high the willows are. So you got to take in consideration how that looks, or what you've seen, either when you've been in that basin or online, for what opportunities you can get there. And last year I was on I missed a 200 in. I would say it was going to be like 200 to 210. And I missed him 3 times. But every day I got onto him and I did the exact same thing. I sat in this spot and I knew the thermals and everything were exactly the same. The directional wind did not change, and he would get up and start moving. And then I would literally just kind of belly crawl or crab crawl through these willows. And I would just work in and I was on him. I think I got on him 6 different times, and I only got drawn back on him twice out of those. And It was because he just fed the other way and I didn't push it. And I literally, the moment he had committed to going the other way and I did not have a play, I backed out and I had to hike up straight up the mountain. But I knew that would keep me safe from having him win me. And then in my mind, I lived to fight another day. And then the next day he would be in a similar area and I got on him again, and so that's another thing is if the stock, if the odds aren't in your favor, you don't think it's a viable stock, don't push it. Because if you win these bucks or they win you, they might never come back, or they might get into the trees. And the moment they're in the trees, you might as well just go find a different deer to hunt, because that's damn near impossible if they're staying in there, unless you just trip over one and get lucky.
Damn. Yeah, it's basically kind of like the moral, if you will, is you got to be smart and remain persistent and not give up.
Right. Well, and persistence is key as well, and also staying patient. But also being in the physical shape to do it. And the guys that I met out last year, it was a bitch to get up and down this basin, to where we were dropping into this basin. And, these guys are flatlanders from Nebraska, and they were just great guys. But I told them, I'm like, hey, this is going to be a lot. And I go, I want to, this isn't just dropping down in there. And I go, we might get lucky and kill something, but I go, you got to be able to do this every day. And I go, potentially you might go on a stalk in the morning, doesn't work out, you jump back up to your glassing knob and then do the same thing. So you got to be confident that you can, gain and loss, 4,000, 5,000 elevation feet. And not a lot of people can do that. And that's where the persistence comes off. But then also it's being smart with your stalks. If you don't think that that's an area that you can get to, don't do it. Just wait until the next day if you have the time,
Yeah, man.
But then it also goes into the other thing of if you're sharing the basin with a few other hunters, they might not think, they might just go out there and blow it out. So you also want to be conscious of that if you even have a glimmer of hope, take it and try to make something happen out of it, because those other guys might not care and they just might blow them out anyways. So,
man, and I'm glad you brought up the whole aspect of being in shape, because that's another piece that I wanted to touch on. I mean, you have to take altitude in consideration. You're not this hunt is not for the weak-hearted. I mean, you're going up to high elevations. You don't know how your body's going to react. This isn't the kind of camp where you're going to be sitting there drinking beer and whiskey all night and then getting up and going and sitting in a deer stand. It's a physically demanding hunt. And
yep.
I mean, I follow you on Instagram right now, and I don't know what the heck you're doing, but it looks like you're sweating your ass off every day.
Yeah, no, and that's a part of it. My girlfriend owns a studio, and it has what is called a Versa Climber. And if you haven't ever looked it up, I mean, it is the best cardio I've ever done. But even though I'm in Denver and I'm at a mile high and everything else, it still doesn't get you prepared for what you're going to be doing, every day in the mountains. And for me, tomorrow morning, I'm going up with the Kafaro crew and we're hiking Red Rocks. And, I think my pack with the weight and everything is about 58 pounds. And so, that's a big thing that people need to consider. And it's not so much the weight. I would say it's just the feeling of weight on your hips and on your shoulders.
Yes.
And you've done, and you have a great, I think you have a Kafaro pack,
44 mag.
There you go. And it's you fill that thing up and walking around, but you keep it on your back for 2-3 hours. There's muscles that you got to build up to get there, and I've had a lot of people with, even Kafaro packs or other packs, they hate the way their hips and their shoulders and their everything just doesn't fit right. So training with that is going to be key. Now, obviously, as you're in Texas, people out, wherever in the flatlands, the Easterners, getting as much cardio as you can, and honestly being healthy, understanding the water intake. Now, I'm saying being healthy. I enjoy the burgers, the wings, and the beers, just like all the other dudes out there. But I also understand that even me living in Denver, I could get altitude sickness if I didn't have the training under my belt. And I actually know people out here that were very well trained and still got it, and so, you just got to be conscious of that. And I would recommend anybody coming out here is just if you could get a day where you're spending it maybe in Denver or a town, mountain town, getting acclimated, because you will feel it. I mean, you probably, when you came out here for TAC last year, just walking up and down the stairs at the event, people are like, damn, this is crazy, and so just trying to do that is going to be, beneficial to you. But, that is a big part of it, because elk hunting, you're kind of methodically moving through and this and that. And even mule deer might not be the most physical once you're on the stock, but you still got to get up there to play the game, and if you can't make it, don't even try, because you'll just end up getting hurt, or I guess I should say, try it and it might not be for you. And next year you're not going to be doing it. So, but, yeah, that's going to be key, is that you gotta make sure that you're in some physical condition.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these are all kind of things that you and I had talked about a little bit beforehand on the podcast, is, the rise in popularity of Western hunting on YouTube has been absolutely insane up through like 2020, 2021. And I feel like we're starting to see kind of a dip, if you will, because so many people saw this, and it's aspirational. It's that romanticized hunting. Like, everybody wants to do it. They've seen it since they were a kid, and so they finally went and did it. And they didn't take some of these things into consideration. They just thought, I just need to go out and get in the woods, and I'm going to get lucky. And it's like, okay, yeah, that might be the case. You might be that lucky guy or girl, but the majority of them, I don't think, take all these things into consideration. And if you don't, I feel that it could potentially sway you away from going out west again, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think we touched on a little bit, before we started the podcast. In the last few years, I've ran into more hunters than I ever have. Mm-hmm. Now, I have also been very fortunate. I've killed some great animals when there was a lot of hunting pressure. But I would say the vast majority of these people seem frustrated with it. And I think, we talked about it. Have we reached the pinnacle, especially with just the prices of everything going up? It's not a cheap hunt by no means. But I think it's going to also, the people that are persistent and can put in the time, they're going to see the value. But I also think that, like, Colorado specifically is going to make a change where it's going to start to limit some of the number of hunter and tag allocations to make it more of a quality hunt, because I feel bad for some of these folks. Like, I think I mentioned, like, I've ran into Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and all they're saying is, we don't see any animals and all we're seeing is people. And that is something that can be tough. And also a tough pill to swallow when you've put in $700 on a tag and another $1,000 to get out here and a couple $1,000 to get the right gear. But, I don't know. I think we'll see this year. It'll be interesting to see how fuel prices and just costs of everything are changing. Is it going to be, are there going to be less people coming out? I don't know. That I guess we'll see that in a few months here, as elk season and deer season kick off. But you got to think it's going to affect the people, because, like, I have a Montana elk and deer tag this year as well. Add that, to my list of things I got to hunt. But I was going to go up in early, for a week in mid-September, and then go up at the end of September, October, because the tag goes through the 15th. Yeah. And now I'm like, man, I'm going to be spending more on fuel just to get there and back. I might as well just stay at a hotel, like go hunt for 4 or 5, 6 days, regroup in a hotel, do some work, and then go back out there versus driving all the way back, whatever, 16 hours, whatever it is. So even for me, it's changing my game plans, and strategy and hunting. So I know it's going to be affecting people.
It's kind of it's a bittersweet thing, because, and I'm going to refer to what Colorado has already started to do, because a lot of the southern, southwest units of Colorado used to be primarily over the counter. And was it 2 years ago, they changed all that into draw tags.
Yep.
And so I think that's a good thing that they did that, because while I say it's a good thing, at the same time, there's a piece in the back of my mind. It's like, dang, now I can't go to that unit that I had that was over the counter. I have to put in for the draw. But like you're saying, it's going to help cool things off to where it's going to be a better hunting experience. And so,
yeah, and I think you're right. And I think more of the state's going to do that. I think it's going to be a combination of those type of they're just being able to limit the number of tags, where when it was OTC, they truly had no way other than the survey at the end of the season of where did you hunt, what did you see, where now in that area, they at least have a limit of tags. Whether they sell them all or not, they're going to understand how many hunters are down there and lease the harvest of there. Now, I hope that they kind of change up the tag allocations, for resident, non-resident, and to be a little bit more in line with other states around us, Utah, Nevada, or Utah, Wyoming, Montana, like those type. Because I do think the quality of hunting, at least in Colorado, has went down. And that's just not my personal opinion. That's the opinions of people that I'm actually seeing in the field, and hopefully that can change, because it would be nice to see people a little bit more excited about their hunt, rather than the whole thing, like I was saying on Instagram, I didn't see any elk, but man, it was a beautiful time in the woods. And now, granted, there's people that are going to say that, but I would say the people that I've ran into, they at least want to see an elk or a deer, or at least hear a bugle. I mean, it's not like they're spending all this money just to go on nature hikes, because you could do that anywhere at any time. So, as I say this, I'm probably just going to be the one hiking my bow around the mountain, not seeing shit this year. So. But I hope that's not the case.
No, same here, man. Well, man, I love all this that we're talking about. I think there's going to be some guys and girls that going to be heading out there to go chase after some mule deer this fall, and hopefully they'll be able to take some of this and go bag them one. But man, before we part ways, I know we're running out of time here. What's kind of some final parting advice Mr. Joe K wants to give the listeners?
Yeah. For me, it's just put in the work early. I don't want to say I'm obsessed, but I would say I'm pretty damn close to obsessed with it. Spend the time reading the articles, following the people that have put in the work, those premier people that are sharing good information. I am on YouTube all the time looking at videos of people that, even if their video is just terrible, looking at where, if they're seeing deer, what type of terrain is it in? Is it similar to what you've been seeing? Maybe even if it's in the same unit that you've hunted, but literally trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together now, rather than having it a week or two before season, to be able to put yourself in a better place to be successful. And that not only is e-scouting online, or just getting your gear and more or less your bow in line to hunt, and I say that because I just was at my archery shop and it was kind of dead in there. And I'm like, what's going on? It's mid-June, middle of June. And they're like, Joe, everybody will come in after the 4th of July. Everybody needs their sight dialed, their bow tuned, new strings. And it's like, guys and girls, this is the time now to get all that stuff put into place. So then June or July, August, and then start of the season is there. You already have everything dialed in. And I will also say, I think a lot of people this year are going to realize that whole Amazon 1 day, 2 day shipping thing. Obviously, we've all experienced it. It's taking longer to quote unquote supply chain issues. Like, get your boots, get your gear, get your stuff all done now, so you're not having any question about your scouting or your gear list a week or two before season or when you plan to come out. I would say that's the biggest takeaway from this podcast is right there, that little bit of information, or at least what I'm telling all my close buddies anyways.
Proper planning and preparation, man. I love it. Well, Joe, where can we find you on social media and see all the giants that you're killing out west?
Social, let me see, Instagram and Facebook. Those are going to be my top two. Facebook is just Joe Kavanaugh, and Instagram is joe.kavanaugh, and that's Kavanaugh with a K. So, but that's where you can find me.
Love it, man. Well, really appreciate you hopping on the podcast today to talk about those high country muleys, man.
Yeah, I hope it helps some people out. If anybody wants to reach out to me and has any other questions, feel free to slide the DMs, and I'll try to help out in any way I can.
All right, y'all, there you go. So we got Joe on here to pick his brain, find out how he attacks these high country mule deer, and hopefully you'll be able to take some of this dope info from him and go put you a high country muley down on the ground this fall. September is not that far away, so make sure you're getting everything done. Make sure you're dotting all your I's, crossing all your T's, and making sure that you're leaving home in a good place. If you haven't figured out how to do that yet, make sure you go back to a recent podcast episode that we did with Mr. Jeff Bynum, talking about how to leave home in a good place when you're gone and hunting with a good conscience, so that way you're not having to worry about home when you're up high or in the mountains chasing after elk, mule deer, whatever you're going after. But again, y'all, I just want to thank y'all for tuning in to the HuntStand podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.